The moment my daughter-in-law raised her champagne glass and thanked the people who truly mattered, she looked straight at me and smiled. Not a warm smile, not a polite one. It was the kind of smile you give when you've already decided someone doesn't belong in the room. I remember the exact sound my fork made when it touched the china plate, a small, sharp tap that seemed louder than the band, louder than the laughter, louder than the clinking glasses echoing across the ballroom. Because in that instant, I understood something with terrifying clarity. She wasn't just ignoring me, she was erasing me. My name is Lorraine Whitaker. I am 62 years old, and I spent nearly 4 decades working as a payroll supervisor for a mid-sized manufacturing company in Dayton, Ohio. I am not wealthy. I never owned a mansion. I never hosted charity galas or belonged to country clubs. But I raised a son on my own after my husband died, and I gave him everything I had. That night, sitting at table 14 3 rows back from the head table, while my daughter-in-law's wealthy parents occupied the center like royalty, I realized something else. I was not going to defend myself. Not yet. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, surgical. And mine would take exactly 2 weeks and 3 conversations to execute. But before I tell you what I did, you need to understand how I ended up sitting at that table, listening to my son's wife call me irrelevant without ever saying my name. It started years earlier, in a very different world. I was born in 1961 in Springfield, Illinois, the oldest of 4 children in a working-class family. My father drove a delivery truck for a grocery distributor. My mother worked nights as a nurse's aide. We were not poor, but every dollar had a job. We reused aluminum foil. We saved plastic grocery bags. We planned meals around sales flyers. I married my husband Raymond when I was 23. He was steady kind, the type of man who fixed things instead of complaining about them. We bought a small ranch house outside Dayton, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a backyard just big enough for a swing set. Our son Nathan was born 3 years later. Raymond died when Nathan was 13. A workplace accident, a collapsed loading rack. Instant, they told me, as if that word could soften anything. Overnight, I became a widow and the sole provider for a grieving teenager. I worked full-time during the day and picked up overtime whenever I could. I clipped coupons. I postponed dental appointments. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years. Every sacrifice had one purpose: Nathan's future. He was bright, disciplined, and determined not to waste the opportunities his father never had. He earned scholarships, worked part-time in college, and eventually landed a job at a financial consulting firm in Denver. The day he called to tell me he'd been promoted to senior analyst at age 28, I cried in my kitchen for 10 minutes straight. I thought the hardest years were behind us. I thought we had made it. Then he met Camille Hartwell. He described her as driven, polished, and from a successful family. What he didn't say, but I heard anyway, was this: she came from a world where people like me did not belong. When I first met Camille, she hugged me lightly, the way you touch someone whose clothing you don't want to wrinkle. Her parents, Victor and Elaine Hartwell, lived in a gated community outside Denver, in a house so large it echoed when you spoke. Victor owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. Elaine chaired charity boards and spoke in a voice that never rose above calm authority. They were polite, but their politeness carried distance. The kind that says, you are tolerated, not included. I tried to ignore it. I told myself Nathan was happy. That should have been enough. But over the next year of wedding planning, something became impossible to ignore. I was not being invited into the process. I was being systematically excluded. And the worst part, Nathan saw it and said nothing. The final confirmation came 1 month before the wedding, during a phone call that still echoes in my mind. Mom, Nathan said hesitantly, about the seating arrangement. You'll be at a guest table. Camille's parents want the family tables close to the front. Guest table, not family. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to be included and started preparing to be remembered. Because I already knew something Camille did not. She thought power came from money, but real power comes from truth. And I was about to prove it. The first time I realized Camille truly saw me as insignificant was not at the wedding. It happened 8 months earlier, during what should have been a joyful phone call. Nathan had just announced their engagement. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the same one Raymond and I bought at a yard sale 30 years earlier when he told me the news. Mom, I proposed last night, he said. I remember pressing my hand against my chest because my heart felt too big for my ribs. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I told him. I'm so happy for you. There was a pause. Then he added carefully, Camille's parents want to handle most of the wedding planning. Most? That word turned out to mean all. Within weeks, Elaine Hartwell had booked a historic estate venue, hired a luxury event planner, selected caterers, florists, and photographers. Every decision was made before I even knew discussions had started. I tried to stay positive. I told myself they were just efficient, that they wanted to relieve us of financial stress. But then the exclusions became personal. I wasn't invited to the dress shopping trip. I learned about the bridal shower from social media photos posted by Camille's cousin. I discovered the rehearsal dinner location through a group email sent to guests. Each time, Nathan said the same thing. I thought they told you. He never confronted them, never pushed back, and every time a small crack formed inside my heart. The breaking point came during a planning call 3 months before the wedding. Camille finally called me directly. Her voice was bright, professional, like someone speaking to a client rather than future family. Lorraine, I just wanted to check in about your guest list, she said. I already sent Nathan the names, I replied. Yes, about that. We need to reduce it. Reduce it. Mom wants to keep the wedding under 200 guests. How many can I invite? A pause. Then she said casually, 6. 6 people for the entire side of the family that had raised Nathan. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Camille, I said, carefully. Those names include his grandparents, his aunt, and his childhood mentor. I understand, she replied, still cheerful. But since my parents are covering the wedding, we have to prioritize their guests. Prioritize, as if family were a business decision. That night, I sat alone in my living room and stared at the old photo albums stacked on the shelf. Pictures of Nathan in Little League uniforms, Nathan at high school graduation, Nathan hugging me after his college acceptance letter arrived. I had been present for every moment, every milestone, every struggle. And now, in the most important celebration of his life, I was being treated like an optional guest. Not a mother, not family, optional. That realization did not make me angry. It made me very, very calm. Because calm is dangerous. Calm is when you stop reacting emotionally and start observing strategically. And once I started observing, I noticed everything. I noticed how Camille never asked about Nathan's childhood, how she referred to his life before Denver as his small town phase, how she spoke about her parents' financial support as if it defined value. Most importantly, I noticed how often she used one specific phrase, people who actually contribute. She said it when discussing wedding expenses. She said it when talking about her parents' generosity. She even said it once at dinner, laughing lightly. Some people just show up and expect to be treated like they matter. Nathan didn't react. He didn't even look at me. That was the moment I understood the truth. Camille wasn't just excluding me. She believed I had contributed nothing. And unless I corrected that narrative, it would become permanent. That night, I pulled out an old filing box from my closet. Inside were decades of records, tuition payments, medical bills, car insurance receipts, bank transfers, every financial sacrifice I had made for Nathan. I began organizing them Not out of bitterness, not to demand repayment, but to create something far more powerful. Proof, because I had learned something after 62 years of life. Arguments can be denied, emotions can be dismissed, but documented truth, that cannot be erased. And I was going to make sure the truth about my lack of contribution reached exactly the right people. Just not yet. First, I needed Camille to say it publicly, in front of witnesses, in a way she could never take back. So I waited. And on the night of the wedding reception, when she raised her glass and smiled directly at me, I knew my moment had arrived. What she didn't know was this: her toast wasn't humiliating me. It was handing me the final piece of evidence I needed. And in exactly 14 days, that evidence would change everything. Camille's toast lasted less than 2 minutes. But in those 2 minutes, she did something that would follow her for the rest of her life. She revealed exactly who she believed mattered. And I just want to thank the people who truly supported us, she said, lifting her champagne glass. The ones who actually contributed, who were present every step of the way. Her eyes moved across the room. Then they stopped on me. She didn't point. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. I think it's important, she continued, her voice smooth and warm, to recognize those who give more than just expectations. A few people laughed awkwardly. A few clinked glasses, and several heads turned toward me. I felt the heat rise up my neck, the kind that starts deep in your chest and moves slowly upward until your face feels like it's burning. But I didn't react. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I simply picked up my water glass and took a small sip, because in that moment, I realized something. She had just said it out loud, in front of 200 witnesses. The lie was now public, and that meant it could be dismantled publicly. But only if I stayed calm, only if I stayed strategic. Nathan never looked at me during the toast. He stared at the tablecloth in front of him, as if it held the answers to a test he was failing. That hurt more than Camille's words, because betrayal from strangers is painful, but silence from your own child, that cuts deeper. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of music, laughter, and polite conversation. I danced with Nathan for exactly 30 seconds during the parent dance before Camille's father took over for the rest of the song. 30 seconds. I remember counting. 1, 2, 3. By 15, I already knew how this would be remembered. By 30, it was over. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I sat at the small desk and opened my notebook. I had brought it intentionally. Inside, I wrote 3 names: Nathan, Victor Hartwell, Daniel Ruiz. Daniel was Nathan's closest friend since college and his best man at the wedding. These were the 3 conversations that would change everything. But before I could have those conversations, I needed something stronger than memory. I needed facts. The next morning, while most guests were still sleeping off champagne and late-night dancing, I walked to the hotel business center with a folder tucked under my arm. Inside were decades of records. I began building the list. College application fees, $800. SAT prep classes, $600. Monthly support during Nathan's college years, nearly $20,000. Car insurance coverage from age 16 to 25, $7,000. Down payment for his first car, $3,000. Security deposit for his first apartment in Denver, $2,000. Emergency medical bill when he broke his wrist in college, $900. Wedding gift, $1,000. Travel expenses for engagement visits and wedding planning trips, over $2,000. By the time I finished, the total amount exceeded $35,000. And that was only the measurable financial contributions. It did not include the years of overtime shifts, the nights spent helping with homework, the emotional support after his father died, the countless invisible sacrifices. I printed 10 copies. Then I sat down and wrote 3 letters, each one tailored to its recipient. Daniel's letter was simple. I explained what Camille had implied, and provided the list of contributions, asking him only to know the truth. Victor Hartwell's letter was direct. I addressed him as one parent to another, stating calmly that his daughter's public remarks were based on false assumptions. Nathan's letter was the hardest. I wrote it slowly, carefully, because I knew every word would matter. I did not accuse. I did not insult. I simply stated facts, and I asked one question. Do you truly believe I contributed nothing to your life? When I finished, I sealed the envelopes and felt something I hadn't felt since the toast. Peace, because I knew exactly what would happen next. Truth does not explode like anger. It spreads quietly, like water seeping into cracks. And once it starts spreading, it cannot be contained. 2 days later, I mailed the letters. Then I waited. 4 days passed before Nathan called. His voice sounded strained. Mom, he said, I got your letter. I leaned back in my chair. Yes, I replied calmly. Did you read the list? There was a long silence. Then he whispered something I had been waiting to hear. I didn't realize it was that much. That was the moment I knew. The first crack had appeared. And once a crack forms, the entire structure eventually collapses. Nathan called me again the following night. This time, his voice carried something new. Not defensiveness, not confusion, shame. Mom, he said quietly, I talked to Camille about the toast. I didn't respond immediately. Silence can be powerful. It forces people to fill the space with truth. She said she didn't mean it the way it sounded, he continued. She said she was just trying to thank her parents. I kept my tone steady. She looked directly at me when she said it. Nathan, another long pause. I know, he admitted. And you didn't say anything. His breathing grew heavier. I didn't want to cause a scene. She already caused the scene, I replied softly. You just chose not to correct it. The words weren't angry. They were factual. And facts are harder to argue with than emotions. I read the list 3 times, he said. I didn't know you kept track of everything. I didn't keep track for you, I told him. I kept track for survival. When you raise a child alone, you count every dollar. His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry, Mom. That was the first time he had said it. But apologies alone don't fix broken trust. I need you to understand something, I continued. This isn't about money. It's about respect. Being treated like I mattered in your life. You do matter. Then why did you let me be treated like I didn't? He didn't have an answer. Because there wasn't one. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Victor Hartwell called me. It was the first time he had ever contacted me directly. Lorraine, he said in the firm, measured voice. I received your letter. I waited. I need to tell you, he continued. I had no idea you had been excluded from the planning process to that extent. I tried to be involved, I replied calmly. I was told everything was already handled, he sighed. I believe you. That surprised me. I also spoke to Camille, he added. She is defensive, but she understands now that her words were inappropriate. Inappropriate isn't the same as untrue, I said quietly. Another pause. No, he admitted. It isn't. Then he said something that shifted the entire situation. I respect what you did for Nathan. Raising a child alone after losing a spouse is not something I can fully understand, but I do recognize its value. For the first time, someone from Camille's family acknowledged reality. An acknowledgement changes power dynamics, because once the truth is recognized by influential people, it spreads faster. The third conversation happened a week later. Daniel Ruiz called me. Mrs. Whitaker, he said gently, I got your letter. Yes? I just want you to know, everyone at the wedding knew Camille's comment was wrong. Your list just confirmed what we already suspected. Suspected. He hesitated. She always talked about how her parents paid for everything. But we all knew Nathan wouldn't be where he is without you. His words landed like warm sunlight after a long winter. Because validation from outsiders carries a unique kind of weight. It proves you weren't imagining the injustice. I haven't shared your letter, Daniel added, but people have been asking questions since the wedding. Questions about what? About why Camille made that comment. And why Nathan didn't defend you. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The shift had begun. Narratives shape reputations. And the narrative was no longer under Camille's control. 2 weeks after the wedding, Nathan called again. His voice sounded different, stronger, clearer. "Mom," he said, "Camille wants to apologize to you." I sat quietly for a moment before answering. "She can call me," I said. He hesitated. "Would you consider coming to Denver so we can talk in person?" "No." The word surprised even me with its firmness. "I'm not traveling to receive an apology," I continued calmly. "If she wants to fix what she broke, she can make the effort." Another silence. Then he said something that told me everything had changed. "I understand." That was the moment I knew the power balance had shifted completely. Because for the first time since he met Camille, Nathan wasn't defending her. He was listening to me. And once someone starts listening to truth, they can never fully go back to ignoring it. What Camille didn't realize yet was this: the real consequences of her toast had not even begun. Because reputations don't collapse overnight. They erode slowly, through conversations, through questions, through quiet doubts that spread from person to person. And over the next few weeks, that erosion would become impossible for her to stop. Camille called me on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 19 days after the wedding. I remember the date because I had just finished watering the small rose bushes in my backyard, the ones Raymond planted the year before he died. The phone rang while I was coiling the garden hose. Her name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, not out of anger, but because I wanted her to feel the same uncertainty I had felt for an entire year. The uncertainty of not knowing whether you mattered enough to be acknowledged. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello, Camille." There was a slight hesitation on the other end. "Lorraine," she said, her voice noticeably softer than I had ever heard it. "Thank you for taking my call." I didn't respond immediately. Silence makes people reveal more. "I wanted to apologize," she continued, "for what I said at the wedding. It was wrong. That was a start, but apologies can be shallow. I needed to know whether this one was real." "What exactly are you apologizing for?" I asked calmly. She paused. "For implying that you didn't contribute to Nathan's life," she said finally. "That was unfair." "Unfair," I repeated quietly. "Yes," she said quickly. I didn't understand the full picture. There it was. Not a full admission yet. Not a recognition of intent. Just an acknowledgement of ignorance. So I asked the question that mattered most. "Did you believe it when you said it?" Her breath caught slightly. "Yes," she whispered. "Honesty. Unexpected, but necessary. I believed that because my parents handled the wedding financially, they were the ones who deserved recognition," she continued. "I thought contribution meant money." I leaned back in my chair. "And now," her voice trembled slightly, "now I realize I was wrong." There was a long silence between us. Then she said something I hadn't anticipated. "I was intimidated by you." That surprised me. "Intimidated?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "You raised Nathan alone. You sacrificed everything for him. My entire life, my parents solved problems with money. But you built his life with effort. I didn't know how to compete with that." The word compete landed heavily. "I was never competing with you," I said quietly. "I was his mother." "I know that now," she whispered. For the first time, her voice cracked. "And I'm sorry it took humiliating you publicly for me to realize it." Her honesty softened something inside me. "But forgiveness doesn't come from words alone. It comes from changed behavior." "I accept your apology," I said finally. She exhaled shakily. "Thank you. But Camille," I added, "accepting your apology doesn't erase what happened. Trust has to be rebuilt." "I understand." "Respect isn't demonstrated with grand gestures," I continued. "It's shown in small, consistent actions." "I know," she said quietly, "and I want to do better." When the call ended, I sat in silence for several minutes. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt something deeper, relief, because the truth had been acknowledged. But the real shift came 2 weeks later when Nathan called again. Mom, he said something strange has been happening. What do you mean? People keep asking Camille about the toast. I closed my eyes briefly. Which people? Friends from the wedding, co-workers, even some of her parents' acquaintances. And what does she say? She tells them she made a mistake. That was significant, because public correction matters as much as public damage. Mom, he continued hesitantly, did you tell anyone about the list? I shared it with 3 people. I replied calmly. You, your best man, and Camille's father. He was quiet for a moment. I think it spread from there, he admitted. Truth tends to do that, I said gently. There was a long pause. Then he asked something that revealed how much his perspective had changed. Do you think she'll ever recover from this reputation, Wise? I thought carefully before answering. That depends on what she does next. Because reputations aren't destroyed by a single mistake. They're shaped by how someone responds afterward. And Camille's true test was still ahead. The first visible change in Camille happened about a month after her apology. Nathan called one Sunday afternoon. You won't believe this, he said. What happened? Camille asked if you could come visit next month. I blinked in surprise. She did. Yes, he said. She wants you to help with something. With what? There was a pause. She's planning a Thanksgiving dinner. That alone wouldn't have been unusual. But then he added something that changed everything. And she wants you involved in every decision. I didn't respond immediately, because inclusion can sometimes be performative. But Nathan continued. She told me she doesn't want you to feel like an outsider, ever again. That mattered, because it showed she understood the real harm she had caused. Not just embarrassment, but exclusion. 2 weeks later, I flew to Denver. Camille met me at the airport herself. No driver, no delegation. She stood near the arrivals area, nervously twisting the strap of her handbag. When she saw me, she stepped forward quickly. Lorraine, she said softly. Her hug was different this time. Not careful, not distant, genuine. During the drive to their house, she spoke quietly. I've been thinking a lot about what respect actually means, she said. I waited. I used to think it came from status, she continued, from what people could provide financially. But now, I realize it comes from history, from sacrifice. I glanced at her. That's a hard lesson to learn, I said. Yes, she admitted, and I learned it the worst possible way. At their house, she showed me her Thanksgiving plans. Guest list, menu ideas, seating arrangements, every detail. This time she said carefully, I want your input on everything. I studied her for a moment. Why? She met my gaze. Because you're family. That simple statement carried more weight than any apology. Because it acknowledged belonging. The true turning point came during dinner that evening. Nathan stepped out briefly to take a call, leaving Camille and me alone at the table. She hesitated before speaking. I need to tell you something, she said. I waited. The day after the wedding, my father called me into his office. That caught my attention. What did he say? He told me that character matters more than wealth, she said quietly. He said, if I couldn't respect the woman who raised the man I married, then I didn't deserve that marriage. I blinked in surprise. That must have been difficult to hear. It was, she admitted, but it was also the moment I realized how badly I had misjudged you. She looked down at her hands. I thought you represented everything I feared. What did you fear? Not being enough, she whispered. Not having a story of sacrifice. Not knowing how to love someone the way you loved Nathan. Her vulnerability shifted something inside me, because beneath her arrogance had been insecurity. Not cruelty, just immaturity, shaped by privilege. I never wanted you to compete with me, I said gently. I wanted you to stand beside me. She nodded slowly. I understand that now. That night, as I lay in the guest room, I realized something important. My goal had never been revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to destroy Camille. I wanted to correct a false narrative. And more importantly, I wanted to restore my place in my son's life. Both of those goals had now been achieved. But what I didn't know yet was this. The real test of whether Camille had truly changed was still coming. Because a few weeks later, during Thanksgiving dinner, something unexpected would happen. Something that would reveal whether her transformation was genuine or just temporary damage control. Thanksgiving at Nathan and Camille's house was the first time in over a year that I walked into their home without feeling like a visitor. It was a subtle difference, but unmistakable. Camille greeted me at the door with an apron tied around her waist, a loose strand of hair escaping her usual polished hairstyle. The kitchen behind her smelled of roasted turkey sage, stuffing, and caramelized onions. "Lorraine, thank goodness you're here," she said with a small, relieved laugh. "I'm already behind schedule." I stepped inside, removing my coat. "Cooking for a full house will do that," I said calmly. This was not the kind of catered dinner she was used to hosting. There were no event planners, no staff, no perfectly timed service. Just a family meal. She had insisted on that. And more importantly, she had insisted on doing it together. Nathan was setting the table in the dining room, carefully arranging place cards. When he saw me, his face softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," he said, walking over to hug me tightly. That hug lasted longer than usual. It felt like an apology that words couldn't fully express. In the kitchen, Camille handed me a wooden spoon. "I need help with the gravy," she said. "Mine always ends up lumpy." I smiled slightly. "That's because you rush it," I told her. "Gravy requires patience." She nodded seriously, like a student receiving a lesson. And as we stood side by side, stirring the saucepan, I realized something. This was what I had wanted all along. Not control, not recognition, just inclusion. Halfway through the afternoon, guests began arriving. Camille's parents came first. Victor greeted me warmly, his handshake firm and respectful. "Lorraine," he said, "it's good to see you again." "You too, Victor." Elaine approached next, her expression gentler than I remembered. "I hear you're the reason dinner will actually taste good today," she said with a small smile. "Camille deserves the credit," I replied, calmly. "She's done most of the work." Elaine glanced at her daughter, and something passed silently between them. Pride, respect, perhaps even relief. Dinner itself was lively and warm. No tension, no careful politeness, just conversation that flowed naturally. But the real moment came during dessert. Nathan stood up, tapping his glass lightly. "I just want to say something before we finish," he said. The room quieted. He looked directly at me. "Thanksgiving is about gratitude," he continued. "And I realize I haven't expressed mine properly." My chest tightened. "I wouldn't be the man I am today without my mom," he said steadily. "She sacrificed more than I ever fully understood until recently." His voice wavered slightly. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to say that publicly." The room was silent. Camille reached for his hand. "And I want to add something," she said, standing beside him. She turned toward me. "Lorraine taught me what real contribution looks like," she said softly. "It isn't measured in money. It's measured in presence, effort, and love." Her eyes held mine steadily. "And I'm grateful she's part of our family." No one clapped. No one spoke. Because the moment didn't need applause. It needed acknowledgement. And it had finally come. Later that evening, as I helped clear dishes, Victor approached me quietly. "You handled that situation after the wedding with remarkable restraint," he said. "I didn't want conflict," I replied. "No," he said thoughtfully. "You wanted truth." He nodded once. "That's a rare kind of strength." As I drove back to my hotel that night, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not victory, not vindication, something calmer, closure, because the narrative had changed completely. And more importantly, my place in Nathan's life had been restored. But life has a way of testing whether reconciliation is truly permanent. And the next test would come sooner than any of us expected. The phone call came 6 months after Thanksgiving. Nathan's voice was filled with excitement. "Mom," he said, "we have news." I already knew. I could hear it in his tone. "You're going to be a grandmother," he said. I sank into my kitchen chair, my hand covering my mouth as tears filled my eyes. "That's wonderful," I whispered. "Camille's 12 weeks along," he continued. "Everything looks healthy." The news brought joy, but it also brought something else, a quiet sense of apprehension. Because major life transitions often reopen old dynamics, and I wondered whether Camille's growth would hold under the pressure of becoming a parent. 2 months later, I visited Denver again. This time, Camille's demeanor was different. Not cold, not distant, but anxious. Pregnancy had stripped away her usual polished composure. She looked tired, vulnerable, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. One afternoon, while Nathan was at work, we sat together in the living room. She rested her hand on her growing stomach. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of not being a good mother," she said. "Of not knowing how to give a child what they truly need." I listened carefully. "My parents always solved problems with money," she continued. "But I know now that isn't enough." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to do what you did." Her vulnerability touched something deep inside me. "Parenting isn't about being perfect," I said gently. "It's about being present." She nodded slowly. "I want my child to feel secure," she whispered. "The way Nathan always describes feeling with you." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "You will learn," I said, "because you care enough to worry." She exhaled shakily. "That's what scares me," she admitted. "Caring means you can fail." "Yes," I said softly, "but it also means you can grow." In that moment, I saw clearly how much she had changed. Not just in behavior, but in perspective. She no longer viewed life through a lens of status and control. She was beginning to understand something deeper. Connection. A few weeks later, during a routine doctor's visit, Nathan called me in a panic. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "there's a complication." My heart dropped. "What kind of complication?" "They want Camille on bed rest for a few weeks," he explained. "Nothing severe, but they're being cautious." Without hesitation, I said the words that surprised even me. "I'm coming to help." There was a brief silence. Then his voice softened. "Thank you, Mom." I flew to Denver the next morning, and as I stepped into their home, seeing Camille resting on the couch, I realized something profound. The woman who once saw me as irrelevant now needed me. Not financially, not symbolically, but practically, emotionally, as family. And in that moment, I understood something with perfect clarity. The greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's transforming the relationship so completely that the original injustice loses its power. Because the narrative had not only changed, it had evolved into something entirely new. And the next chapter of our lives together would prove just how lasting that transformation truly was. I stayed in Denver for 6 weeks, while Camille was on bed rest. 6 weeks is a long time to share space with someone you once considered an adversary. Long enough for polite masks to disappear. Long enough for truth to surface. At first, Camille struggled with the loss of control. She had always been the type of person who managed every detail of her life. Her schedule, her environment, even the emotional tone of a room. Now she couldn't even walk upstairs without help. One morning, about 10 days into my stay, I found her sitting on the couch, staring at a stack of unopened mail. Her eyes were red. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "I feel useless," she admitted. "I can't work. I can't host. I can't even cook dinner." I sat down beside her. "Do you know what I learned after Nathan's father died?" I said quietly. She looked at me. "That usefulness isn't the same as worth." Her brow furrowed slightly. "I don't understand." "When Raymond died," I continued, "I couldn't fix everything. I couldn't protect Nathan from grief. I couldn't control our financial situation overnight. but I still mattered to him. She listened intently. Presence, I said, is sometimes more valuable than productivity. Her eyes filled slowly with tears. I think I finally understand what you meant when you said, contribution isn't about money, she whispered. I nodded, because this was the lesson she had needed to learn all along, and life had delivered it in a way far more powerful than any argument ever could. Over the following weeks, our relationship shifted in quiet, unexpected ways. We watched old movies together in the evenings. She asked me about Nathan's childhood stories she had never heard before. We laughed about his teenage stubbornness, his terrible haircut phase, the time he accidentally flooded the basement trying to fix a washing machine. Each story built a bridge. Each memory filled in pieces of Nathan's life she had previously ignored. One afternoon, while sorting through a closet, she found an old photo album I had brought during my visit. She sat beside me, flipping through the pages. There was a picture of Nathan at age 12, standing beside Raymond in a Little League uniform, both of them grinning. Camille touched the photo gently. I wish I had known him, she said softly. He would have liked you, I replied. Her eyes flickered with surprise. Really? Yes, I said. Raymond valued determination. He respected people who worked hard. She looked down again. I don't think I worked hard for most of my life, she admitted. I was given everything. I placed my hand over hers. Growth counts as hard work, too. She took a deep breath. I want to be a different kind of parent than the one I had. That statement carried more weight than she realized, because it meant she was no longer defining her identity through status. She was defining it through intention. Nathan noticed the change, too. One evening, after Camille had fallen asleep, he sat beside me at the kitchen table. I've never seen her like this, he said quietly. Like what? Open, he replied. Vulnerable? He hesitated. Mom, I also need to say something. I waited. I was afraid to confront her. Before the wedding, he admitted. I thought if I pushed back, I might lose her. His honesty stung slightly, but it was necessary. And now I asked. Now, I realize avoiding conflict almost cost me you instead. His voice grew heavier. I failed you back then. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You corrected it, I said gently. Not fully, he whispered. I should have defended you in that moment. Yes, I agreed softly. You should have. He nodded, accepting the truth without argument. That acceptance mattered, because accountability is what transforms regret into growth. By the end of those 6 weeks, Camille's health stabilized. The doctor cleared her to resume normal activity gradually. The day before I flew home, she surprised me with something unexpected. A small framed photo. It was a copy of the Little League picture of Nathan and Raymond. She had added a handwritten note beneath it. Family is built by love, not money. She handed it to me quietly. I want this in your home, she said, as a reminder that I will never forget what you did for Nathan. I hugged her tightly, and in that moment, I knew. The woman who once erased me had now chosen to honor me. The transformation was real, but life was about to present us with a challenge that would test that transformation in a way none of us expected. The challenge came 3 months later, shortly after Camille entered her 3rd trimester. Nathan called late one evening. His voice was tense. Mom, something happened at work, he said. My stomach tightened. What kind of something? Camille was passed over for a major promotion, he explained, and she thinks it's because of her pregnancy. That kind of workplace betrayal cuts deeply, especially for someone who built their identity around professional success. Over the next week, Camille's emotional state deteriorated rapidly. She became withdrawn, quiet. The confident woman who once controlled every room now avoided eye contact during video calls with me. Finally, one afternoon, she broke down. It's not fair, she cried over the phone. I worked harder than anyone on that project. I listened carefully. They said the decision was based on long-term availability, she continued bitterly. But we both know what that means. I did know. And I also recognized something else. This was her first real experience of systemic exclusion. The same kind of invisible dismissal she had once imposed on me, but this time she was on the receiving end. "Do you remember what you told me once?" I asked gently. She sniffled. "What?" "You said people should recognize those who truly contribute." There was a long pause. Then her voice trembled. "I didn't understand how painful it feels to be overlooked." "That's the lesson," I said softly. Silence filled the line. Then she whispered something that revealed just how much she had changed. "I want to handle this differently than I did before." "How?" "I don't want revenge," she said quietly. "I want fairness." That distinction mattered because it showed maturity. "Then focus on facts," I advised. "Document your contributions. Present them calmly." She exhaled slowly. "That sounds familiar," she said. I smiled. Truth is always the strongest strategy. Over the following weeks, she did exactly that. She compiled records of her work performance project results and leadership contributions. She requested a formal meeting with senior management. And when she presented her case, she did so without anger. Just facts. 2 months later, she called me with a different tone in her voice. "They reversed the decision," she said breathlessly. "They admitted they overlooked key data." I felt pride rise in my chest. "You earned that," I told her. "No," she said quietly. "I learned how to fight the right way from you." Her words carried deep meaning because they showed the final stage of transformation. She no longer viewed truth as a weapon. She saw it as a foundation. A week later, Nathan called again. "Mom," he said, his voice full of emotion. "We have one more piece of news." "What is it?" "We decided on a name for the baby." My heart skipped. "Thomas Raymond," he said. "Thomas for Nathan's father, Raymond for my husband." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "That means everything to me," I whispered. "We wanted him to carry both sides of his history," Nathan said, "the past and the future." When I hung up, I sat quietly in my kitchen, holding the framed photo Camille had given me, and I realized something profound. The greatest form of revenge isn't destruction. It's restoration, restoring truth, restoring respect, restoring relationships, because the narrative that once excluded me had been completely rewritten. And soon, when my grandson was born, he would grow up hearing the full story, not of betrayal, but of how truth, patience, and dignity transformed a broken family into a stronger one. And the final chapter of that transformation would begin the day I held him in my arms for the first time. The call came at 3:17 in the morning. I woke to the sharp vibration of my phone against the nightstand, my heart already racing before I even looked at the screen. "Nathan?" "No one calls at that hour unless something life-changing is happening." I answered immediately. "Mom," he said breathlessly, "Camille's in labor." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All I could hear was the hum of the hospital monitors in the background and Camille's strained breathing somewhere nearby. "I'm on my way," I said finally. I booked the first flight to Denver before the call even ended. The airport was still dark when I arrived, the fluorescent lights harsh against tired faces of early morning travelers. I remember clutching my carry-on bag so tightly my knuckles turned white, because this moment wasn't just about becoming a grandmother. It was the closing of a circle that had begun years earlier, the night I sat at that wedding reception table, listening to someone say I had contributed nothing. Hours later, I stepped into the hospital waiting room. Nathan stood the moment he saw me. His face looked exhausted, anxious, and hopeful, all at once. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug that felt almost desperate. "She's been in labor for 9 hours, he whispered. "Is she okay?" He nodded. "Yes, it's slow, but the doctors say everything looks stable." We sat together in silence for a long time. Hospitals have a particular kind of quiet, not peaceful exactly, more like suspended tension. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, a nurse approached. "Family of Camille Whitaker." Nathan stood immediately. "That's us." The nurse smiled. "You have a healthy baby boy." The words hit me like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Relief, joy, gratitude, all at once. Minutes later, we were allowed into the room. Camille lay propped against the hospital bed, her face pale, but glowing with exhaustion and triumph. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. She looked at me the moment I stepped inside. "Lorraine," she said softly. Her voice was hoarse, but her eyes were clear. "Would you like to hold him?" My throat tightened so suddenly, I couldn't answer right away. I stepped closer, my hands trembling slightly as she placed the baby into my arms. He was so small, so warm, so impossibly fragile. His tiny fingers curled instinctively around mine, and in that moment, something inside me shifted in a way I had never experienced before. I wasn't thinking about the wedding, or the hurt, or the years of exclusion. I was thinking about continuity, about legacy, about how love moves forward through generations. "What's his name again?" I whispered. Nathan smiled beside me. "Thomas Raymond Whitaker." Tears blurred my vision. For Raymond, for the life we built together, for the sacrifices that had shaped Nathan's future, for the truth that had finally been acknowledged. Camille watched me quietly. "I want him to know where he comes from," she said softly. Her words held a depth that went far beyond simple sentiment. They held understanding, respect, and something that once seemed impossible: trust. Later that evening, after visiting hours ended, Nathan walked me back to my hotel. We stood outside, beneath the glow of the parking lot lights. "Mom," he said quietly, "there's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." I waited. "I used to think strength meant avoiding conflict," he admitted. "But now, I know it means standing up for the people who matter." He looked directly at me. "You matter more than I ever said out loud." His words settled into my heart with a quiet permanence. Because acknowledgement, when it comes from someone you love, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As I returned to my hotel room that night, I realized something with perfect clarity. The injustice that once defined my relationship with Camille had been completely transformed. Not erased, not forgotten, but transformed into something stronger. And the final proof of that transformation would come the following spring. 6 months after Thomas was born, we gathered again. This time, not for a wedding, but for his christening ceremony. It was held at a small church near Nathan and Camille's home. Nothing elaborate, no luxury planners, no grand guest lists, just family, real family. As I stepped into the church that morning, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews in warm colors. I saw Victor and Elaine already seated near the front, talking quietly. When they noticed me, they both stood. Victor extended his hand warmly. "Lorraine," he said, "it's good to see you." Elaine smiled gently. "We saved you a seat next to us." A simple gesture, but one that symbolized everything that had changed. I sat between them, watching as Nathan carried Thomas down the aisle toward the baptismal font. Camille followed her hand, resting lightly on his shoulder. They looked like a team, a partnership built not on status or power, but on mutual respect. During the ceremony, the pastor spoke about legacy, about how each generation inherits not just names and possessions, but values, truth, integrity, love. As I listened, I thought back to the long journey that had brought us here, the betrayal, the humiliation, the strategic patience that had allowed truth to surface, and the transformation that followed. After the ceremony, we gathered in the church hall for a small reception. At one point, Camille tapped her glass gently. "I want to say something," she said. The room quieted. She looked directly at me. "When Thomas grows up," she said steadily, "he will know the full story of our family. He will know that his grandmother, Lorraine, built the foundation that made his life possible." Her voice softened. and he will know that I once misunderstood what contribution really means, until she showed me the truth. No one clapped, not because they didn't feel moved, but because the moment felt too meaningful for noise. Later, as I held Thomas, while guests slowly departed, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, not because everything had been perfect, but because it hadn't, because the imperfections, the conflicts, and the painful truths had ultimately strengthened our relationships instead of destroying them. As I gently rocked my grandson in my arms, I understood something I wished more people knew. Revenge doesn't always mean hurting someone back. Sometimes it means telling the truth so clearly, so calmly, and so persistently that the truth reshapes everything. It means reclaiming your place without raising your voice. It means allowing dignity to outlast cruelty. And if you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or made to feel like you didn't matter, I hope this story reminds you of one thing. Truth has patience, and patience, when paired with courage, always finds a way to be heard. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever experienced betrayal, family drama, or the quiet power of karma-based justice, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me where you're listening from. Share your own experiences. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, truth, and emotional revenge that transforms lives, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because sometimes the strongest stories are the ones that remind us we are never truly invisible.